Hello everyone. Let's get started with our session this afternoon. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us to celebrate Open Education Week with another excellent event. I'm Michelle Braley. I'm a librarian at the University of Alberta, and I'm pleased to introduce this session, the OEA story, leading the way in open education publishing in Alberta. I would like to acknowledge that I'm located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. The panel session this afternoon will be facilitated by Jessica Norman, an open education librarian at SAIT, and our panel members are Sona McNaughton from Red Deer Polytechnic, Christy Hurl from University of Calgary, Laura Gunn from Medicine Hat College, and Oscar Vergara from Norquest College. So I'm in the unique position to introduce the session because I'm also involved in open education in Alberta. So I've been asked to share a little bit more background on this initiative before handing it off to our panel. So I will let Jessica change the slide for us. So Open Education Alberta is a grassroots initiative that was established with the goal of providing access to infrastructure to create and adapt OER materials in Alberta. Specifically, the infrastructure is the Pressbooks tool, which is a WordPress-based tool for ebook content. The way the OEA service works is that the software is hosted by the University of Alberta Library. I'm the main contact for Pressbooks at University of Alberta, so all of your troubleshooting, account creation, and just general Pressbooks questions usually just go to me. But there's other representatives from all participating institutions that support projects at their local institutions. So the workflows and agreements can be established to fit individual institutional contexts. So as you go through the session today, if you're interested in seeing if there is a local representative at your institution, you can visit the website openeducationalberta.ca and see who your contact would be. So I'm going to pass it off to Jessica now. She's the current chair of Open Education Alberta.
Thanks, Michelle. So as Michelle already alluded to, the Open Education Alberta group was formed initially at the behest of U of A, and really Michelle has to be given full credit for the majority of the work to get us up and running and to persuade the powers that be that this is a useful endeavor. We functioned for a while as kind of an ad hoc group, and then as we continued to grow and when we determined that this was something that was definitely going to be useful for institutions across the province, we decided that we needed to establish a more long-term structure. So we're still in that process. I do want to say that. I'm currently serving as chair for the newly formed OEA steering committee. So this is really our first year of work, but that committee was created as a subset of the larger membership group, just because as we did grow, we needed to have a smaller group that was focused on more around strategic planning and the project work that occurs. We're definitely looking as we set up our structure and really kind of forming the work that we're doing to come up with things like organizing informational and educational meetings for our members, or maybe for the wider Alberta context. We're also looking to do things like facilitate development of shared resources, again, for not only our membership, but possibly for folks throughout Alberta, and focusing on the areas of publishing programs for post-secondaries that may not have the same type of, that may need some additional support due to the kind of institutional staffing that's available, or just maybe needing some additional support in how to start in these kind of programs. We're also looking at preparing statistics and starting a strong program on reporting, so that as we continue in this work, we can really highlight what the benefits are to our member institutions, as well as share our successes to the province as a whole, and really demonstrate the value of this collaborative work that we're developing. So on the screen is just a slide that kind of explains a little bit about our structure. As Michelle already alluded to, the member institutions, there's polytechnics, colleges, and universities, have representatives that manage at that level things like the work with creators, the agreements that need to be signed, the logistics of the workflows and things. But each institution has signed a collaborative agreement with the University of Alberta around the use of the Pressbooks product, and really understanding our responsibilities as an institution to support the work for the overall initiative. And so that's kind of where we're at here today, is to bring together folks from a range of institutions and from different stages in the development of their work within the Open Education Alberta initiative, to talk a little bit about what it looked like starting this work at their institution, why it was something that they thought would be beneficial, some of the things we've learned along the way, some of the things we still are looking to learn, and those kind of things. We thought it would be useful for the folks who, as I said before, may be looking to build something similar at their institution, or kind of wondering what it looks like when we kind of do this grassroots work. So having said that, I am going to turn it over to our panel participants today. And as I mentioned earlier, folks, as you enter your first round of questions, if you can provide some basic introduction and information about your institution, I'd appreciate that. The first question up for us today is, what did the first phase of the OEA work look like at your institution? And I believe Laura and Christy. So Christy, if you'd like to talk to that.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Christy Hurl, and I am a librarian at the University of Calgary. And I had been involved with this kind of grassroots group of librarians and educational technologists and instructional designers from across Alberta, thinking about technology infrastructure for open education and how we might work together as a province to build something that would work for everyone for a couple of years. And it was really exciting that, you know, in the last couple of years, this actually came to be through the University of Alberta being able to provide this infrastructure for the whole province. And I didn't, when I was sort of advocating for this infrastructure to be set up and working with this cross-provincial team, I didn't have a really solid plan in mind, to be totally honest. I didn't think about how I was going to implement this on my campus, or I didn't have a project right in mind. But serendipitously, in early 2020, I was approached by Dr. Verena Roberts, who will probably be familiar to many of you because she's been present at this Open Education Week quite a bit this week. And she had an idea for integrating open pedagogy, co-design, and developing a Pressbooks as part of her course in fall 2020. So that happened at about the same time that Open Education Alberta was coming into existence. So I was really excited. But what that meant was that the first phase of Open Education Alberta at my institution was really about, you know, building the plane as we flew it, because we launched right into the development of this Pressbook. And not only was it a development of a Pressbook, but it was a co-design project that involved graduate students contributing chapters to an edited book. So there was a lot of complexity in that project and a lot of nuance and a huge number of learning opportunities for me. So we really did sort of jump right into the pool of open education with that first project. And I was really grateful that the OEA infrastructure was there to make that possible for us. I'll pass it over to Laura.
So my name is Laura Gunn. I've been serving as the copyright specialist for about the last year and a bit at Medicine Hat College. I was actually covering a maternity leave position, so I'm not permanently in the copyright position. But as I was taking over that position, we were reaching out to faculty on campus, trying to figure out who was using OER, how much it was happening at our institution. And it's very much in its infancy at Medicine Hat College still, but we're working on it. And simultaneously, as I almost kind of fumbled upon Open Education Alberta, one of the instructors I had contacted said, "Hey, do we have access to Pressbooks?" And I'm like, "Well, you're in luck. We're just working on that, actually." And then she actually ended up being our first author of Some Problems of Philosophy, which was published earlier this year. So the first phase here at Medicine Hat College very much was working on the development of policies and procedures with Pressbooks. So defining the role of the designated representative, development of the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, and then the development of the procedure for the staff and faculty wanting to author OER. So yeah, that was kind of how we went about it. And I can very much share with Christy in that, we kind of just were flying by the seat of our pants when we took this on, but it's going really well now. And we're actually going on to our 5th book at Medicine Hat College now.
Excellent. Thank you. I believe we'll move to our next question. It looks like, let's see, Sona, if you would like to address the question, if you could share what your workflow looks like on these type of projects at your particular institution.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jessica. So yes, I am Sona McNaughton, the librarian and the OEA representative at our institution, which is Red Deer Polytechnic. And so with our participation in this program, any of our faculty, staff, and students with the proposed open book project can request to use this service. So the process for taking on these projects is fully mediated through the library. The library is the main point of contact. And how it works at RDP is that interested parties would first complete a Pressbooks account request form to initiate the request. So we created this form using SpringShare's LibWizard platform, and it's integrated into the library's OER guide. So that's the first step. And then this basically initiates a meeting with a librarian who would then meet with the OER creator and provide an overview of the service and walk them through that terms of the agreement that's set out. So that's our internal agreement with the creator. And that is a signable PDF form that would be completed. And this agreement also includes information on the open licensing and the accessibility standards. So we really wanted to make sure that the creators were aware of all of the elements that were included in creating their open textbook. And once that agreement is signed, the library would then complete the process by requesting a Pressbooks account on their behalf. So we would contact OEA directly. And then couple of however much time would pass, they would get their Pressbooks account. And then support for OEA creation and the open publishing is all provided through the library. And I would like to take this opportunity to also shout out to both Mount Royal and to MacEwan, because we really strongly borrowed and adapted with their permission agreements and forms and processes to get this workflow going. We also kind of started to, we were basically building the plane as it was flying as well, to borrow your phrase. So it was really good to be able to draw on those experiences. And so, yeah, that's basically our process. We have 3 projects on the go, and they've not yet reached this stage of being published in the catalog. So those are some future processes that we're still trying to figure out in our workflow. So that's kind of how it works in a nutshell at Red Deer Polytechnic.
Thank you very much. So Oscar, at Norquest, what type of workflow have you developed?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. My name is Oscar. I'm the Associate Chair for Language and Settlement Studies at Norquest College. And I can honestly say I've had a really good experience here with the OER and Pressbooks. I find that it is a real game changer. And I'm fairly new to the college and to this project. But for our workflow, of course, we have already been able to publish our first, actually it's our second OER, because we had one previously from another department, language instruction for newcomers to Canada. So they came before us, and then we piggybacked on them, and we were able to produce our own kind of textbook for settlement studies. And so for us, I guess the workflow for us would be learning more about Pressbooks, because it seems to me that everybody that we encountered was pretty new to Pressbooks, and everyone was learning on the fly how to use it and what to do with it. And that can get pretty complicated. But we were lucky enough that we had people, a couple of librarian types, and were able to help us kind of work through all those steps that are needed in order to get our content into the Pressbook format and platform. So I'm happy to say, in the end, we were able to publish our textbook, our Canadian Settlement in Action, History and Future. And it's great on kind of two levels, because it kind of enabled us to reach out to faculty members and subject matter experts to write the content, but also for our students, because our students have a textbook, but this complements everything that they're already doing in the program. And so it's been pretty successful that way. And it's been so successful and so well received that we are now currently working on part 2 of our textbook. So we wrote 5 chapters in the first rendition, and we're going to add a few more after that. So other than that, it's been I can say it's been a really good experience, and we're really happy to and lucky to work with within this platform.
That's excellent news. I'm really excited to hear about that expansion. For our next point, we wanted to talk a bit about the pain points that this initiative may have alleviated at your institutions, or what was what did you see at your institution that this particular program would address? What gaps were there? So, Christy, did you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I think the biggest pain point at the University of Calgary is that within our library IT, we did not have the capacity or the staffing to host our own instance of Pressbooks. And I think that's a common conundrum for a lot of libraries, especially smaller ones or ones with fewer IT resources. So, we had sort of been debating the notion of how we could support Pressbooks infrastructure on our campus, looking at our teaching and learning unit and the library, and potentially purchasing a software as a service kind of purchase for Pressbooks. So that was a huge pain point that was alleviated. And then I think the other things were really more around having a community of practice around open. My background is in scholarly communications, and so I kind of came to open education as a bit of a newbie, trying to learn about the unique challenges and aspects of working in open education. So it was really, really great to have a community of local people. I mean, the open world is wonderful because everything is available online and it's openly licensed, and the community is so open and giving and great. But it is really nice to have people just down the road or up the province that you can call and ask questions to. So I would echo what Sona said about having access to other institutions that were a little bit farther along the path of open than you were to borrow policies and procedures from. And it definitely made it easier for me to justify to library admin, a peer institution has developed this memorandum of understanding, and they were much more likely to accept that and not be as worried about implementing something similar on our campus because somebody else, locally had kind of already paved the way. So being able to sort of access those documents and having a community that was so open to sharing them and presenting options was really great. And then, as we've all kind of continued on our open journey together, I always know that if we're facing an issue or I have a question or a problem, it's unlikely that I'm the only one in the province with that question or problem. And so having this community of people who are all kind of working towards the same things at their institution has been really great. So yeah, I can't say enough about the community aspect of Open Education Alberta and how helpful that's been.
Thanks. I'm going to open that question up to the panel as a whole. Would anyone else like to speak about any pain points at their institution or unique gaps that this would help address?
Medicine Hat College is quite a small institution. And same thing, there's no way we would ever be able to host our own instance of Pressbooks. So it opens up a huge opportunity for our community here.
Oscar, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I can honestly say from my personal experience, the main pain, I guess I can't really say it's a pain point. It's just it's more of a learning point, a learning curve, and that is Pressbooks, and it is a wonderful platform, but it can get pretty complicated, and there's lots to learn, and there's I think I had a lot more questions than answers at the very beginning. And because everybody was also new to it, they were also kind of muddling their way through and experimenting and things like that. So I think that I'm certainly going now through this a second time. I'm much better prepared. Doesn't mean I'm an expert. I will never tell anyone that I am a Pressbooks expert, but I've gotten to know my way around, and I think that if you can have people who feel the same way and embrace it, that it can really work to your benefit. You can use it to your advantage, and really the sky's the limit, because there's just so many things and so many ideas that you can really utilize it in such a way that it's engaging to your readers. It's interactive to the audience that you're targeting. So the more prepared you are with approaching and using Pressbooks, the better off you'll be. And I was able to find, this is back about a year ago, I was able to find kind of short videos on how to do things and that explained it a little bit. But I think there's certainly room for more to access out there. So
thanks. I will add from my perspective as the OEA administrator at State Polytechnic. One of the gaps that we had, or maybe it wasn't so much a gap, is just simply an area that I needed to have more awareness around, was some of the administrative aspects of having this. So I had worked a lot with individuals who wanted to create content, and so I felt like a pretty good idea of what a practitioner would be looking at for open education. But trying to shift my thought process to become the administrator of a program and really wrap my head around publishing as opposed to producing or being a SME, a subject matter expert, that was a new idea. And so I really appreciated when I joined OEA the fact that I could speak, because I was the only one at my institution, and I found that that was true at other institutions as well. There was a single person, whether we were representing the library, the teaching learning center, a faculty member, someone, but often we didn't have anyone else to bounce things off of at our institution. And this was a place we could go and we could speak about things like workflows and budgeting, staffing needs for administrative or maintenance work, those kind of aspects that may not resonate with an author, but they're important to us at an institution level to maintain. So I know that's a unique aspect of this particular project that I haven't seen in some of the other communities of practice that have developed in Alberta. So our final formal question for the panel is around what lessons have been learned. So was there anything that you learned in the first phase of implementing OEA at your institution? Were there any real surprises? When you reflect back, what do you see? Laura?
Implementing this was quite smooth because everybody's so great at Open Education Alberta. Shout out to Michelle. But the one big surprise I came across when I was implementing this was with the MOU. So we had not included a clause about the requirement to acknowledge the U of A and our institution in the books, and it caught one of the authors by surprise. So we now have a clause in the MOU indicating this, and I think that's maybe something important to point out to any institution that would be, in the beginnings of implementing this and into their college or university. So
that's a useful thing to note. We do want to acknowledge the fact that U of A is spearheading this particular initiative, and they are providing not only the funding for Pressbooks platform currently for all institutions to use, but also, there is staffing considerations, right? Folks putting time and effort towards managing the IT side of things as well as the administrative side of things. So we're very appreciative of that, but yeah, it does something that we have to remember in our processes. So
for sure.
And I think, Sona, you wanted to add something that had come to your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So one of the biggest things that we learned is that there are a lot of moving parts to this. And so, we were doing a lot of coordinating of different things between the internal agreements and our processes and our supports. And again, like basically building things on the fly as we needed it. So it was a really fast moving ride in that respect. And then, as I mentioned before, like at our institution, the library coordinates all of this, and we answer all of the support questions. And I would say that the biggest surprise has been the types of questions we've been getting. So, for example, our first project involved a faculty member who was turning the creation of their OER textbook into a course assignment. So the students would be involved in creating OER as well. So we needed to figure out, okay, well, what does that look like from the perspective of using student work, obtaining consent to use that work, their intellectual property and the licensing considerations. So that was very interesting. And then, of course, we fielded the regular questions around licensing and Creative Commons, but we also got some interesting questions around the inclusion of third-party content and the copyright implications, which is always fun. And we found very helpful the Code of Best Practices for Fair Use and Open Educational Resources. And I can actually just pop that into the chat here. But we refer to that quite a bit because that's something that the creators at our institution are interested in integrating, that third-party content, much of it is copyright, and how does it work with fair dealing and everything. And then most surprisingly, we haven't yet received a lot of Pressbook specific questions. So we're not quite sure if it's because they're not quite, we're not sure where people are with their projects and whether they're at the stage of some of the questions, or maybe they're finding it very intuitive to use, which is great. So I guess, time will tell if we get a lot more of those questions, and then we'll be needing to provide the supports around that as well. That's our experience.
Sounds great. And I would totally agree with that. We also use the Code of Best Practices, Appendix 3, I think it is, for Canadian context. And I refer to that often for information on what we can and can't do, and how, but even more so how to do it appropriately. It's been wonderful. I would add, I guess, my input, which would be that it was a surprise for us, but a good surprise, that we were able to find a way to incorporate a student practicum into our Pressbooks projects. So currently we have an LIT program, a Library Information Technology program at SAIT, and I've been able to have a practicum student each year work with me to learn about this form of publishing, to learn about open education and open licensing, and then to really get into Pressbooks and to assist with some of the editing that we need to do, or some of the support for authors that are being done. We had someone do, for example, substantial work in H5P development around some text content at a different student project. When they came in, they did a lot of revisions and copy editing and learned a lot about how Word does and doesn't play well with Pressbooks. It was a value to the student and the skill set that they could go out to the library field with. And it was a very valuable outcome for us. And it's not something that we had originally envisioned, but it turned out to be a really good fit with some of the student learning that we were doing on campus. So I would encourage, kind of like Sona was saying, hers was a slightly different context, it sounded like, a student project for within a course. Mine was more of a practicum or a student placement. But in both cases, it seems like a really good mix to bring the student perspective in. I mean, ultimately, they're the ones going to be using the content, right? So I think we're at a stage right now where, at least I know from the steering committee perspective, we feel like we've made it through the first initial rush of creation of content in terms of like our memorandums of understanding and some of our higher level workflow. But now we really need to solidify that with some additional supporting documentation around like institutional practices and things. And we've started having conversations around what does accessibility mean? What does supportive content and create like things like copy editing and quality of writing and things like that, so we can codify some of that as well. So I know that from a committee or from an initiative perspective, I know those are what's going to occur in our near future. Michelle, is there anything that you'd like to add as a wrap up for today's session, or anything additional that you'd like to add?
Not too much. I really appreciated what you said, Jessica, about the next steps, certainly around some of those things that the broader committee is thinking about around accessibility and more around content creation. Maybe even around like further building community among institutions for collaborative practices. So if anyone also has any ideas to share, that is also welcome at this time.
Yeah, I would say that one of the things that hasn't occurred yet, but that we foresee it as being a strong future for this particular initiative, is to start finding a way that institutions can collaborate between themselves. So member institutions, for example, could come together and find authors that could share the work to develop develop resources between institutions. Because we don't have the equivalent of a BC campus or an eCampus Ontario that can provide that umbrella structure, we really have to kind of look and see if there's a way that we could fill that need and promote that kind of work within our smaller initiative, or open it up to a larger group of folks who might be interested in joining. So, folks, I think that's all of the questions and things that we're up for today. So I appreciate your time, and I do believe that is the conclusion for our session. Thank you, folks. If you have any questions, the link to the Open Education Alberta site is up, and there's contact information through that site to get a hold of us. By all means, please reach out if you'd like to find out more about becoming a member, or just learn more about our operations if you'd like to find out about reproducing this at your neck of the woods.